the other preseason games that stood out to me over the last couple of days, we finally got to see John Wall back after a long absence, recovering from the Achilles injury, and DeMarcus Cousins back after his slew of injuries, and they're the Kentucky connection now in Houston. And John Wall's look great so far. And I know it's preseason, but he looks quick. He had 21 points last night and mid-teens in the first preseason game. His playmaking still looks great. And I don't think he's back to what he was. But again, like we were saying, if he's kind of 80% of what he was, he's a 15 to 20 and 10 guy on a given night. And I think that could be really appealing for James Harden as he makes his way back, because he has a guy who can move the ball and take some of that load off of him. And John Wall, like, he was an all-star at his peak. So it's still a really great player to have. And it's another piece that you could work with. And maybe if he shows something, you can trade him later in the season.
Yeah. Like we talked last time, Houston's run that experiment under slightly different circumstances, but with Chris Paul. So the question or the decision the coach management would have to make is, okay, do we want to take that and say, no, this isn't quite enough, but maybe one more piece, maybe not a superstar, but a really good five, like a Tristan Thompson type player.
Marcus Cousins.
Yeah, I guess that there's some questions there about how he'll return to play. I mean, maybe he returns to play and they just have that piece.
He's the same thing, right? If he's at 80%, he was one of the first like demigod centers that could do a bunch of stuff. And he's a vet now. And all I've seen from him so far is he's just been banging threes. But yeah, he's a guy who can step out and shoot it, and you could give it to him in the post and he can pass and he can score out of the post. So it might be something that Houston hasn't had in a while, something different that they can give to teams.
Yeah, and I guess Harden is such like a sun player, like so illuminating, so much gravity that he's going to force you to pay so much attention to him that's the best kind of player you can put those best case they're at 80% type of players around and let them shine, moons reflecting the light, so to speak.
Wow.
So I'm really into coming up with metaphors. I read this paper by Orwell the other day.
That was lovely.
Thank you.
The last game that stood out was we finally got to see our first look at Kyrie and KD together after KD missed last season. And they both put up 15 and 18, I believe. And Kevin looked kind of similar to he was before. And he was making his one-legged pull-ups. He was making his one dribble around screen mid-range. His first basket of the game was a dunk, so he still showed that he can get up there. I think because he's so long, right? Even a debilitating injury like an Achilles, he still has the shooting, so he's still going to be effective. But if he can retain that explosiveness, then he's going to be superstar Kevin Durant. And I think it's really going to help this Nets team because Kyrie has been his best when he's got an alpha dog wing, as we saw with LeBron. But it's Kyrie can do his thing, but there is a guy that he has to defer to in the end who can provide that scoring. And so I think this combination is actually going to work. And this Nets team, if those two guys are staying focused on basketball and staying focused on winning and not much else, they're going to be a really, really, really good team. And I'm excited to watch them.
You know what I've got to ask you about if we're talking about Kyrie, though, eh?
Oh, yeah.
I don't quite remember the entire quote, but it started referencing Malcolm X and ended saying, "I don't talk to pawns."
Yes. I don't have much to say on it.
Yeah, well, the point he's trying to make is like, you guys aren't, like, there's no real, this is so phony, this is so fake, this isn't journalism, is like the best interpretation I can give. Like, it's not that I won't give answers, it's that I won't give answers to fake questions, which just, you're talking about his attitude, and like, if he can defer to the alpha dog, and the fact that he's giving those kind of answers kind of tells me the mentality's not where you would want it to be completely.
Okay. I'll start by saying this. Kyrie, as a human being, has done many great things and has also done some dangerous things with some of the statements he's made about the earth and the conspiracy theories and all that, because that can really encourage those type of dangerous mindsets of like anti-government and whatever. He's also done amazing things. He's donated a ton of money to charity, and he's provided a lot of help during COVID. I'm going to talk about Kyrie, the basketball player. Suck it up. That's all I got to say. You make $40 million a year to spend half an hour as part of your job on your contract to talk to reporters. And yes, part of their job is to ask you the same question every day or after every game. But it's in the NBA, when you have games every other day, there's not many deviating paths that they can go with their questions. They've heard it. You've been in the league for many years. So what is he expecting? It's not that hard. But he's moaning and crying and being a baby about doing his job, whereas like, we'll come on here and talk for 2 hours on a podcast, and all he has to do is sit there and give the same answer for 20 minutes after a game.
And there is a way to be the eccentric genius who is disdainful of such questions, and in his responses manages to show that, but also show like brilliance. And you point out the hole in the questions. You say, well, that question implies this. It's flawed because of that. You asking that question says this, or giving an answer that just totally takes it in a different direction. But just I heard about this through Reddit, so there's two things I kind of have to highlight from that thread. The first was like, man, this quote belongs on I Am Very Smart, because it just sounded so like disdainful, like I'm so above everyone. And then the second part was part of the quote that I left out was he was talking about like donating fine money, and someone said like he's VP of the players union, he should know where his fine money goes. So yeah, you said the problem is you can't separate completely the basketball player from the human being, because who the human being is affects who the basketball player is. And as long as if he puts these kind of quotes but he shows absolute superstar level consistent performance with like the mentality you need on the court, then revisionist history calls him an eccentric genius. If he has these type of quotes and doesn't show up consistently, isn't there in the big moments, does silly things on the court, then revisionist history looks down disdainfully on him. So we talk about what he says off the court because we're interested in it, adjusts our expectations for on the court. And that's the Nets fascinate me with that KD Kyrie lineup and Steve Nash coaching. So I'm going to have my eye on them, and I'm going to have my eye on Kyrie. So I'll keep bringing it back to that all throughout the season, but I'll try and keep it centered around what's he doing on the court.
The last thing I will say, and this is related to the Harden conversation we had on our last podcast about setting an example for players coming into the league and how that's going to affect this whole age of player empowerment moving forward. If Kyrie, the vice president of the Players Association, can do this, then what's going to stop all these young players who are entering the league looking up to him from doing the same thing? And then you've cut off this whole branch that is so important for the brand you're trying to build, right? You need the media. You can have your social media, but the journalism and the relationships you built with all these reporters who follow the team and write about you, you need them. And so you can't provide this example for young players because you're really going to cause a disconnect and a fissure between those two groups of people, right? So it's just, I need him to take a deep breath, review, and say, okay, all I have to do is this. If they're asking bad questions, I can sit there and say, can you ask a different question?
I mean, no one calls Kawhi Leonard a media genius, but he gets through it, eh?
Yeah, I'm over it. Like even Marshawn Lynch, I'm just here so I won't get fined. Like you could do that, but I don't like it. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. Let's finish up some basketball talk with just a quick update from some of the prospects I saw this weekend. First off, Scotty Barnes, FSU versus Florida. He had 17 points, 5 assists, and he typically had been a little bit hesitant in the last couple of games, but he showed some aggressiveness in this one. He had 2 absolutely filthy posters. I'd recommend you go watch those. He bodied the dude, and he's just showing his physicality because he's a pretty big, solid point forward type guy, and he just showed a little bit of aggressiveness there. Cade Cunningham against Wichita State, who have been known to be a pretty tough team, and he had his first kind of rough game. I think he started the game 0 for 6 from the field. He had 4 turnovers in the game. He just was struggling to score. And after all that, he hits the game-winning 3 on an isolation. Like, he makes big-time buckets. He's a big-time player. You can stop him all game, and then when the time is right, he's going to take that team. And somehow Oklahoma State still undefeated. And it was a huge character game for Cade, and it keeps adding to the run he's putting together already in his early college career. So just tough game. He's going to learn from it. He needs to attack a little bit more when his shot's not falling and get to the free throw line because of his size and strength. He should be able to do that, and that will come with experience. A lot of those guys, like a Jason Tatum, have been hesitant to get to the line early in their careers, and they know it's as they get older, that's a way to get easy points when your shot's not going. So he needs to learn that. But then what can you say about the big time, clock's running down, tie game? I'm going to take a 1 dribble, pull it back, and knock down a 3 right in your face to win the game. Just excellence, pure excellence.
You said he showed a clutch gene last game. This is double clutch gene.
Yeah, and I think because of Oklahoma State not being the strongest team, there's going to be a lot of tight games this season for them. So it's just going to give him more and more opportunities to kind of build up that resume of making big-time plays in close games.
Wow. I mean, you've got to be salivating if you're the bottom-ranked seed and saying, wow, this guy can make okay teams look great.
Yeah. Again, like I said last podcast about the whole Chris Paul thing, how he had kind of a mediocre team and elevated them. So you just think when he's surrounded by NBA talent, how much better he's going to be. The last person I got to shout out is on the women's side of college basketball, and I know some people won't be super interested, but Paige Bueckers, who was the number 1 recruit out of high school. She's fantastic. I know probably the only women's basketball player any basketball fans would know would be like a Sue Bird or maybe a Sabrina Ionescu, who got drafted number 1 overall for New York Liberty last year. But Paige Bueckers made her debut with UConn. She was in the starting lineup. I think they blew out the team, so it wasn't that indicative of what this season is going to look like. But she had 17 points, 9 assists, 5 rebounds, 5 steals, and she's a baller. She's so good. I don't know if I'll watch all their games, but just a nice person to highlight because I think in women's you have to play all 4 years just because it's not the same revenue driver where you can do the one and done, and there's not the same pressure from the WNBA as there is from the NBA. So she'll play all 4 years, and I think she might end up being one of the most decorated college basketball players of all time when all's said and done because she's a baller. So just wanted to highlight her impressive debut.